The town that doesn't exist. It started with a wrong turn. I was driving cross-country to visit an old friend when my GPS lost its signal. I didn't think much of it at first. It was a rural area, the kind where cell service drops in and out. The road was empty, stretching endlessly between fields of tall grass that swayed in the wind. Then I saw the sign, "Welcome to Dunbridge." I frowned. That wasn't the name of any town on my route, at least not according to the map I'd printed out as a backup. Still, I figured I'd take the detour, find a gas station, and ask for directions. The road narrowed as I drove into the town. The houses were old and weathered, their paint peeling and their shutters hanging crookedly. There were no cars on the streets, no people walking around. It was the middle of the afternoon, but the place felt eerily quiet, like a ghost town. I parked near what looked like a general store and stepped out of the car. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint but unmistakable, a mix of damp earth and decay, like something rotting just out of sight. I wrinkled my nose and headed toward the store, hoping to find someone inside. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the sound echoing in the stillness. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with dust. Shelves lined with canned goods and faded labels stood in neat rows, but everything looked old, like it hadn't been touched in decades. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I stepped further inside, my footsteps muffled by the worn wooden floor. At the back of the store, a bell hung above the counter, so I rang it, the sharp ding cutting through the silence. I waited. Just as I was about to turn and leave, I heard it, the sound of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere behind the counter. "Hello?" I called again, my voice cracking slightly. A man appeared. He was tall and thin, with pale skin that looked almost translucent under the dim light. His clothes were old-fashioned, like something out of the 1930s, suspenders, a button-up shirt, and scuff leather shoes. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. Yeah," I said, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. "I think I got lost. Can you tell me how to get back to the highway?" He stared at me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "There's no highway near here," he said finally. I frowned. "There has to be. I was just on it about 20 minutes ago." He shook his head. "You must be mistaken. Dunbridge is a ways out from any main roads." I glanced out the window at my car, sitting alone in the empty street. The thought of staying in this strange, silent town any longer than necessary made my skin crawl. "Well, thanks anyway," I said, backing toward the door. "Wait," the man said suddenly. I froze. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" He leaned in closer, his pale eyes locked onto mine. "Dunbridge isn't for people like you." Before I could ask what he meant, the bell above the door jingled, and I spun around. A woman had entered, her face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. She glanced at me briefly, her lips curling into a faint, almost predatory smile, before heading to one of the shelves. I turned back to the man behind the counter, but he was gone. I practically ran back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. As I pulled out onto the road, I realized something was wrong. The streets looked different. The houses, the buildings, everything seemed slightly off, like the layout had shifted while I was in the store. The streetlights that hadn't been lit before now flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows. I drove faster, desperate to find the way out. But no matter which turn I took, I couldn't find the road I'd come in on. Every street seemed to loop back into the town, trapping me in a maze of twisting alleys and identical houses. The sun was setting now, the sky a deep orange that cast an eerie glow over everything. And then I saw them. People. They were standing on the sidewalks, their faces turned toward me as I drove past. They didn't wave or move, just stood there, watching silently. By the time night fell, my gas gauge was dangerously low. I pulled into a narrow alley and killed the engine, hoping to buy myself some time to think. The town was silent again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was oppressive, heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. I tried calling for help, but my phone had no signal. Then I heard the knock. It was soft at first, like someone gently tapping on the car window. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. The knock came again, louder this time. I turned slowly, my eyes darting to the driver's side window. A face was pressed against the glass, pale and expressionless, its eyes wide and unblinking. I screamed, fumbling for the keys, but my hands were shaking too badly to start the engine. The face disappeared, but the knocking continued, now coming from all sides of the car. I glanced around, panic clawing at my chest. Shadowy figures surrounded the vehicle, their hands slapping against the windows in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Then, as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. The figures stepped back, melting into the darkness. And that's when I saw it. At the end of the alley, a light flickered. It wasn't a street light. It was too dim, too unnatural. It pulsed softly, casting long, shifting shadows across the brick walls. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to follow it. Leaving the car behind, I stepped into the alley, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. The light seemed to move, drawing me deeper into the maze of streets. The air grew colder, the smell of decay stronger with each step. Finally, I emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood an old, crumbling church, its steeple leaning precariously to one side. The light was coming from inside, flickering through the broken stained glass windows. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but something pushed me forward. The inside of the church was empty, the pews long gone and the floor covered in dirt and debris. At the far end, where the altar should have been, stood a massive stone archway. The light was coming from within it, swirling and shifting like liquid gold. As I approached, I noticed something etched into the stone. Symbols, strange and otherworldly, that seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't explain. And then I heard the voice. It was low and guttural, speaking words I didn't understand. But one thing was clear, it was calling my name. I don't remember much after that. I woke up in my car, parked on the side of a highway miles from Dunbridge. At first, I thought it was all a dream. But when I opened my glove compartment, I found a small, crumpled photograph. It showed the stone archway, glowing faintly in the darkness. I tried to find Dunbridge again, but every route I took led nowhere. The town doesn't exist. At least, not on any map. But sometimes, late at night, I see the light in the distance, flickering faintly like a beacon. And I know the town is still waiting for me.